Welcome to Leadership Unlocked, where we uncover the pivotal stories that shape extraordinary leaders. I'm Dusty Holcomb, and on this show, we don't just talk about leadership, we decode it. In every episode, we sit down with changemakers who've walked through the fire, challenged the status quo, and emerged with wisdom worth sharing. These aren't just lessons, they're lived experiences, real moments that reveal the mindset, the resilience, and the clarity behind creating lasting impact. Today, you're going to hear one of those stories. In 2020, Dustin Riechmann watched his business unravel. Ads failed, referrals dried up, and the pipeline went cold. So he made one bold move: podcast guesting. That pivot built a seven-figure business and has sparked a system that's helped hundreds of entrepreneurs do the same. If you think one conversation can't change your business, this episode will prove otherwise. Let's get into it. This is Leadership Unlocked. All right, I am super jazzed and excited, Dustin, to have you on the show today. I'm really, really excited to learn more about you and how you ended up where you are.
I'm grateful to be here, Dusty.
All right, so I got to ask you this, and I'm really curious. What's a principle that you know now that you wish you'd known 5 years ago?
When I think back 5 years ago, it was one of many times in my adult life that I had at least 4, if not 5 or 6 sort of different roles, jobs, businesses going at once. And something I've done a really good job at that I would give myself some leadership cred for is really simplifying where I apply my expertise and spend my time professionally. And it's paid big dividends.
Now that is so powerful. And I want to go all into this simplification approach. But just to give our audience some background and context, why don't you walk us through your journey a little bit? And you've done some really cool stuff and had lots of fingers and lots of different pies. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, my professional background was in engineering. So, coming out of school, I was a traffic engineer. That's a specialization I found myself into. So think traffic like cars, not like website traffic. And I practiced traffic engineering in many different modalities for 17 years. So I was a consultant for 17 years doing that. And while doing that, through the majority of that time, I always had other projects, other side hustles, other interests that kept me plugged in different ways outside of that main career. 2009 was a really pivotal time in that journey, and I was doing marriage and ministry work with my wife. And so that was a big part, Christian faith life is a big part of what we believe in and practice. And we're doing a lot of these things locally and in dusty church basements. And I kind of had this moment where I'm like, I feel like there's something more to this. And so I found myself figuring out how to create a website and started blogging in 2009 about sort of our adventures as a young married couple. And people really started to be attracted to that. And it inadvertently became a business, ended up writing a book, and we started doing some speaking and different things around that. And that was really important because it really brought me online into the digital marketing space. So in order to grow that brand and that message, I really started spending all my free time outside of my main job and my family time learning digital marketing. And so I started taking vacation time from work to go to digital marketing conferences, get certifications, and learn. But that really culminated in 2018. I finally sort of had an epiphany moment of, you know what, my whole identity doesn't have to be as an engineer. That was something I was really wrapped up in. And even though I was doing a lot of different creative things, I always felt like, how would I ever detach myself from this professional identity that I had been very, very blessed to get, because I came from a place where I didn't think that was ever going to be possible for me. But in 2018, through a series of conversations and spiritual direction, I left engineering and kind of hung my shingle as a full-time consultant for the first time, and started doing marketing consulting for a lot of different businesses, local and online. One of those partnerships, or one of those relationships, turned into a partnership with a company called Fire Creek Snacks. And so a meat stick chapter emerges in my story, where I took this consumer packaged good and helped a local business owner bring it online. And so we started doing e-commerce activities that eventually led us into wholesaling and going to trade shows and learning how to sell into brick and mortar stores. And that was actually going really well for a couple of years. And I was basically on the grind, doing trade shows, selling meat sticks, doing consulting for my other clients. And then this date emerges in the story of March 2020, where I was driving to Chicago for a trade show, and I got this weird call that's like, hey, go home, it's canceled. I'm like, that's weird. So I come home and I'm lost. Frankly, I didn't know what the heck we were going to do with this business. And about half, more than half of my local consulting clients were shuttered. They were shut down. And so lost about 80% of my income in the course of a couple weeks, and was very lost. And so I spent a couple of months sort of mired in that and trying to figure out what in the world happened. And the silver lining in this gets a lot closer to what I do today. Summer 2020, I decided to try to get on a podcast for the first time as a marketing channel for this Fire Creek Snacks brand. And it was awesome. And we sold some meat sticks. And I was like, hey, wow, this is strangers on the internet are buying meat sticks from me from telling a story. This is pretty weird. And so I just leaned into that and I started treating that as my go-to marketing strategy. And so ran with that for about a year and kind of resurrected the brand. And we struck some really big wholesale deals from the relationships that came from that. And then from there, people started saying, hey, Dustin, like, how in the world are you doing that? That's a really interesting story. Like, you grew an e-com business to 7 figures and you didn't use paid ads, which was pretty unique in the space. And so I started coaching people through inbound requests on how to do the same things I was doing. The last 3 years, I have been fully focused on that. And so now I run a company called 7 Figure Leap, and we work with really talented coaches and consultants, agency owners, and we help them use podcast guesting and partnership marketing and a lot of the things that expand from there to grow their impact, grow their income, and to basically evangelize their brand online.
I'm really struck though when I think about this. Like when I think of an engineer, I'm not thinking of somebody who has got like 9 different side hustles and, you know, an entrepreneur. Like typically when I think engineer, I'm thinking of somebody who's got like everything planned out and mapped out and architected fully. And, you know, there's a plan B and a plan C and a plan D and a plan E. And maybe I just don't know the right engineers. Clearly, I know a really cool engineer now. Did you always know that you were going to be an entrepreneur and that there was some like little seed or nugget that said, I'm going to find a way to perpetuate value for myself and, you know, for others differently than just a 9-to-5 job?
Yeah, I do think so. And even the roles I carried in engineering were about as entrepreneurial as it would allow. And when I say that, I came out of school. So in college, I worked for the Army Corps of Engineers. An amazing job for a college student. I mean, I learned a ton, and it was well-paying, and it was a very kind of esteemed role that I got to play. And so I was faced with a fork in the road when I was getting ready to graduate. I had this full-time federal job waiting for me that paid really well, and I'd built up some time there, and it was going to be a great opportunity. And I went to this college fair to sort of see what else other people had to say. And this very small company at the time, about 12 people, said, hey, we do traffic engineering. I'd never heard of that. I was like, this is not something I had studied. I'm like, tell me more. And so what I decided to do was spend my last semester with them. And the reason I was attracted to that path is it was quite entrepreneurial. It was a small, scrappy company, a lot of private clientele. It was a way to practice engineering that wasn't so structured and rule-bound. And you know, ultimately, the way I would describe it is traffic engineering is human engineering. Like really what we're trying to design for is human decision-making, trying to predict behavior. A lot of these things I now see in hindsight as like fundamental to business and marketing. And I think that was really what drew me there. And then, you know, that ran its course after about 10 years. And I bought in there and I was a partner in that firm. There were some major leadership problems and I ended up leaving. And so when I joined the next firm, I only had 2 stops. The second stop in engineering was with a larger firm, about 350 people. But their vision was, hey, we really want to bring a new practice, a traffic engineering and planning practice into our larger company. We think you could be the guy for that. And so essentially I operated a startup department within a larger established organization. I ultimately became a partner there, left before I got into a board position, but I was pretty involved in strategic planning. I was one of the youngest people to be involved in those activities. So even in the engineering career, I would say there was a bent toward entrepreneurship where I could like kind of control my own destiny, have some autonomy, and be able to do some unique things within the industry that I don't think I would have done in a traditional engineering role. I would say my engineering experience was more like an attorney within the engineering industry. There's a lot of persuasive writing, presentations, a lot of facilitation, a lot of standing in front of angry mobs at city council meetings and having darts thrown at me and be able to take that and respond. So yeah, I think with the benefit of hindsight, I can see how all that equipped me for what was ahead. But I can tell you that 2017, when I was feeling extreme pressure about how do I give all this up, quote unquote, that I built versus this like new adventure that I really feel God was calling me to. That was a tough period, but yeah, in hindsight, easy answer. Oh yeah, definitely always going to be an engineer. But for 17 years I wasn't, or always going to be an entrepreneur, I should say. For 17 years I wasn't, because I had this really tight identity hang up with what I kind of where I'd come from.
One thing that you mentioned, I think is fascinating, and I hadn't thought about it until you just said it. And I'd love to maybe even push in on it a little further, that human engineering, traffic engineering is human engineering.
Yeah.
And now like dots connected and things clicked into place when you said that, especially around this concept of simplicity and how simplicity scales. When you think back about your engineering training and the lessons you were learning during those seasons of life, what are some of the most important things that you now know, or incredible gifts or benefits that you get to leverage from a human engineering perspective in the work that you today helping mission-driven entrepreneurs evangelize their brands?
Yeah, so a lot of infrastructure projects, things that touch the public, are met with a lot of resistance, right? There's in a sense, you have to have the ability to build a consensus around a new idea, because people don't like change. People, there's a not in my backyard, NIMBY is an acronym for a reason. Like no one wants the new thing to be affecting their life and their livelihood. And so I think being able to appreciate that, have empathy for people, be able to see their perspective and bring the truth and bring reality and bring, scientific facts and figures to the table to try to build a consensus around what could be an unpopular idea is definitely what I think one of the key lessons. And I think that parlays really closely into this idea of partnerships. And in any situation, how can we provide a win-win-win outcome where maybe the developer needs a win, the city needs a win, and the community needs a win? I've always felt strongly that there is a solution that can accomplish that, even if it's not the obvious solution that any of those one parties would independently bring to the table.
I love that win-win-win. I'm a huge fan of Stephen Covey's, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and thinking about the win-win. What's an example in the work you do today where you think about a win-win-win, the 3 wins?
Yeah, I would say podcast guesting, when it's done the right way, is a pretty specific or application of that, right? So if people aren't aware, podcast guesting is what I'm doing right now. So it's basically like, hey, I know some stuff. I'm going to go into someone else's audience and I'm going to serve them, and I'm going to be a featured guest expert on a given topic. And that is, the serve is the big part of that, right? If I come into someone's audience, I need to serve that audience in a real way and add unique value. If I do that well, I win, because for me and my business and my brand, I get exposure. People get to understand how I think and maybe be attracted to want to do business with me. The audience wins because they gain something unique. They gain fresh stories, perspective, inspiration, knowledge, wisdom. And because the audience wins, the host wins. So the host is the third party in this equation, in this example. And so if you do this right, like the host doesn't say, oh man, Dustin took a client from me. And the audience doesn't say, what a waste of my time. And I don't say, wow, that guy, set me up, and that was a horrible experience. Like if you do it right, all 3 parties ultimately, the pie grows bigger for all 3, because it's an additive relationship, and that's a win-win-win relationship, to put it real simply.
I love that. That's a great example, and it is that idea of creating mutual and extended value that makes it so rewarding, because it's intrinsically rewarding to you when you show up and you just know, hey, I'm just here to create value. And if I do that and do that well, it reminds me of, one of the first lessons I got from one of my mentors, which was, if you take care of of your team, they will take care of the customer, and that takes care of the bottom line. We have to always do that and do that well. I want to double click on one thing you said around leadership. You mentioned, you left a firm because there was poor leadership. I'm not going to ask you to call anyone out, but what's an example that you've seen in your career there or elsewhere of leadership not done well? Because we get to learn as much from things that we see that aren't done well as we do, sometimes more than when we see that it done well. What's a lesson you took from that experience?
Yeah, and I can speak specifically. No one knows. They can look it up, I guess. I don't really care, but which firm it is, that I don't think it would matter. But it was a very instrumental part of my journey, because what happened for me was I was one at the time that this progressed into, we had about 35 employees. So we grew from like 12 to 35 in my time there, after some hiccups through the 2008 housing crisis that affected us directly. So 2010, 2011, it's a growing firm. We're doing really well. The owner has said for many years at this point, I'm looking to step aside. I'm looking to retire. There's a transition plan in place. So I become part of a 5-person ownership group that wants to acquire the business. So I'm 10 years the junior of the next closest person. So more of the senior people there. I was invited into that discussion. We had a lot of intention and open dialogue, and everyone thought, man, this is going great. And so we had a date in mind. We got financing in place, and out of the blue one day, we get this email that says basically from the owner, hey, the president has been fired, and this is kind of like my rodeo sort of thing. And it's like, oh my gosh, where'd this come from? So you can imagine the shock that went through, and it felt like a failed coup attempt, even though that was not at all what had happened or what we had aspired to. And so these sort of second in command, third in command, fourth in command just started jumping ship, because it got really nasty really quick. And so, in that moment, I was like, well, there's no guarantees. Things aren't in writing. They don't count. There's a lot of those kind of lessons. And I was kind of caught up in that. For me, fortunately, I was like, well, I'm young. I have some value in the marketplace. I actually left and went to a much better situation. But something happened in that transition that was really interesting. I go to the new firm, and I'm thinking things are really good. And all of a sudden, I get this letter one day in the mail from the Professional Regulation Association of our state, basically saying, grievance has been filed against your professional engineering license. And so this guy who had caused all this turmoil couldn't just let it go. He had to basically effectively try to take my professional licensing away for no cause. And so I had to hire an attorney and appear in front of a board. It was a complete disaster. And so in the moment, that taught me a lot of resilience. And in hindsight, it taught me a lot about forgiveness and reconciliation, be able to put that behind me and not hold grudges that were deep and hurtful, because this is someone I had viewed as a mentor, throughout my earlier career. So yeah, there was a lot in that sort of 6 to 12 month event that I've taken with me. And I would say that was a big one. And then another one, Dusty, if I may, much more recently in the scheme of things, I had found my way into this podcast guesting idea, and I'd been doing some one-on-one coaching. And there was a period in 2022 where I invested for the first time a large sum of money into someone's mastermind. And there were promises made, and it turned out that it was a shill, and it was a disaster, to be frank. And I went into debt for this, and I felt like an idiot. I was under extreme stress and pressure under all this. And so that was a moment where I very discreetly, through some great coaching, someone taught me the idea of not focusing on what this did to me, but what this did for me, and not being a victim, and starting to look at all the positives that could come out of this experience. And in hindsight, I met 2 people in that group that have become some of the people, people that have become best buddies from a business standpoint. I learned exactly how I don't want to treat people. I learned how not to run a mastermind. And I think a lot of those lessons that I picked up through similar experiences, including that one I just said more recently, have heavily informed how I like to show up and do business and run communities. So I'm very grateful I wasted all this money and spent this time with this guy that was kind of a shyster, because it did a lot of things for me. And so that's kind of the lens that I like to look back through some of these experiences. It's all the lessons that come from those times of adversity.
It's so interesting to hear you say that, and just knowing that when we can take those things that happen to us, and we can make them happen for us, it's the same thing. But then we're just replatforming to instead being historically focused to be future focused and lesson oriented. It reminds me of something one of my favorite pastors used to say, which is, holding on to anger and resentment is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. And, from a leadership perspective, it's fascinating that someone tried to reach out and take your licensure, but it's like when there's no basis and it's just anger and it's resentment and it's, having to lash out, and that never pays a dividend, right? It never works. It's like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. Like if you think about it now and you think about the greatest lessons you've learned over the last couple of years, I'm zeroing in on this navigation of the tension where you had to take a step, where you had to, walk away from a professional engineering career, successful professional engineering career, at a point where you've got, family and kids and all these things. It's not just like you're 22 years old and you're going, hey, let's move to Albuquerque.
Right.
This is a step. How did you manage and navigate that process? And what was your thinking construct or model that allowed you to do so with both eyes wide open and leaning into the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something I've reflected on a lot in hindsight. And to give people context, I was almost 39 at the time that this really came to a head. I have 3 kids, and all 3 kids at that time were, school aged. My wife was a stay-at-home mom. We were eight years into that journey. I was everything from a breadwinner, insurance, consistency standpoint. My wife is not an entrepreneur, she's very risk averse. And so I remember it distinctly. It was the summer of 2017. I had been doing all these different things and sort of trying to grow my own business while working 50, 55 hours a week doing engineering, had a leadership role leading 20 people in that company at that time. It was sort of the face of this entity we had created with the traffic engineering specialty. And I knew without a shadow of a doubt that 1, this was not sustainable. And 2, God was calling me towards something different. And also true at the same time, I had extreme connection, commitment, ties back to this engineering identity. I grew up extremely poor, broken home, alcoholic father, all the things adversity. And so even the opportunity to go to college was a huge question mark. And I was very fortunate and blessed to get a full ride. I got to go to engineering school. And so, this is 20 years later that I'm sitting here feeling this tie back to like, who am I to give all that up? I've been given this amazing opportunity. Like, who am I to say engineering is not good enough for me? That's kind of how this felt, right? And I felt this great pull forward. And so what happened in that summer time was I just felt this immense call to do it. And I had this like epiphany moment, which sounds really, really silly almost in hindsight. It's like so obvious now, but it wasn't in the moment. And the big breakthrough for me, believe it or not, was, hey, Dustin, guess what? You can go try to be an entrepreneur. And if it doesn't work, you can go back and be an engineer, right? I know this sounds so obvious now, but it didn't at the time. I was really hung up that this was a permanent decision. It could be a fatal flaw if I leave. But I did realize that. And I kind of gave myself this freedom. And I said, you know what? I can go try it. And if it doesn't work, I can go be an engineer again. I'm not blacklisted from the industry. I'm leaving on my own accord. And so I communicated that with my wife. I remember sitting down with my kids and saying, hey, I've been working a lot. Like I realized that's been a problem. And for the next 6 months, I'm going to work even more. So I have this goal, summer 2017, by the end of this year, I'm going to make X dollars in additional revenue from the consulting side. And that's going to be my runway. So the engineer brain was still there, Dusty. Like I did have a plan. And I did that. And I basically worked 2 full-time plus jobs effectively. And I got new clients. I was doing all the marketing stuff, nights, weekends. I was doing engineering all during the work week. And I got to the end of 2017. The stockpile existed. And I was able to kind of look my wife in the eye and be like, it's happening. I'm doing it. We can do this. And January 2nd, 2018, I go have lunch with my boss, explain what's happening. It was really amazing. This is another great leadership lesson for me. As I sit down with this gentleman and I say, hey, bad news. I need to leave. Here's what I'm called to do. And he says, very disappointed in that. And I'm the president at the Engineers Club. We need a new website. Could you give me a proposal? Like literally as I'm leaving this job, he's offering me an opportunity as like a stepping stone into the new path. And then they end up leaving me on a contract basis for 6 months to help find and train my replacement. It was a perfect like part-time role that eased my way in, and everything worked out like so well. But I was so scared to even have this conversation because I had this inflated self-importance of like, the whole company is going to miss me. And they did, but ultimately everyone's replaceable. And I helped in the transition and they helped me in my transition. And that was a win-win-win, opportunity that I just could have never saw coming.
It reminds me of this story. Senior pastor at my old church told me, and we were talking about wrestling with tension and transition. And, I was telling him, hey, I'm struggling with there's a lot going on. And he shared, he goes, Dusty, one of the things that I learned about, 10 years ago, he's a senior pastor at a mega church. And he said, I was under a tree in the yard of the church with my Bible and a journal, wrestling with why I felt like it was so much. There was just so much to do and I couldn't keep up. And this really connects for me with something you were talking about regarding identity. And he said, and I realized in that moment, I felt it pressed upon me that my role was to be the steward of the role as senior pastor for a season, but that season would end.
Yes.
But in the meantime, I was going to do a good job of that, but I couldn't ignore my other roles because the role that would end would be senior pastor. The role that would not end would be husband, father, community leader, friend, brother, all these other things. And so and I know that I've struggled with that before where I get wrapped up with an identity that's a professional obligation, but it's not an actual role that has any degree of permanence or any degree of enduring meaning. And I think that that's something that people who are in a business environment or any type of role where you get wrapped up in your identity as this thing and forget that we all have many roles and we all have, our lives to live. Shakespeare's, the play, in our lives, we all play many roles and we have many entrances and exits. Like we have to understand that. And I, for one, I'm delighted that you figured it out because, just a few years later, I mean, it's not like we're talking about this has been a 20-year journey for you. This is, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that long, but it's amazing how quickly time can pass and how agonizingly long it can feel when you're in the process of navigating these unknowns and these tensions. But man, just knowing that other people like you have navigated this role tension and this identity tension is so incredibly powerful. And it should be liberating when we take a step back and go, well, in the rearview mirror, there were things working for me, not against me, that really helped elevate.
Yep. And there's no, there are permanent decisions, fatherhood, hopefully spouse, right?
Yeah.
Religious vocation. There are some, but your job probably ain't it, right? Like you probably have some more freedom there than you want to give your brain wants to give yourself the independence or the autonomy to go pursue. And so when I talk to young people and young entrepreneurs, they're, what's your number one piece of advice? I'm like, there's no permanent decisions outside of these select few. So give yourself the freedom to think in terms of experience or experiments, seasons, like you just said, roles will come and go. But let those form you as a person into hopefully someone who's more effective in time as the different roles emerge, because you're not going to be able to predict them in advance anyway. So you kind of got to roll with the punches, but give yourself that mindset of, opportunities will continue to come. Abundance is real. And I can step into faith in some things, take measured bets, but take some bets, take some bets and see life as a series of experiments and experiences.
Yeah. And it's so powerful when you do embrace that. And as similar to you, it's like, I can always go back to being a corporate CEO and executive. Like those skills aren't going to die on the vine. Like your skills as an engineer, we're going to go away.
Right.
But there's a calling and there's a time and a space. And sometimes you just have to take calculated bets and then take the leap as well. I was giving a speech to a leadership group and I was talking about the power of keystone moments. And oftentimes these keystone moments that are like the arch, the keystone drops in, and that's what gives everything else so much strength. we don't know them or see them in the moment. Like you didn't know you were getting this formative, all this going on. Now you look back and you go, oh, it's so obvious. This thing locked in and I have so much strength because of it. And it's so powerful when we do take the time to reflect and we do take the time to learn from it, not just for ourselves, but I'm really struck by the fact that you did do this reflection and you have taken these lessons and codified them. Now you're able to share those. You're able to share that story that others can learn from and others can take value from. And I think that's the real moment of a keystone, is being able to not just leverage it for your own strength, but for the strength of others. And I'm super grateful that you can share that with us today. That's really cool. Let me ask you something. Are you leading off of instinct? I mean, you've got the vision, you've built the thing, but most leaders I talk to are still flying without a system. Vision to Victory, the mastermind, changes that. It's a 12-week experience where we install the leadership operating system you've always needed: purpose, strategy, cadence, metrics, execution. This isn't a course. It's not more content. It's a small group of leaders who are done chasing clarity and ready to lead with it. You'll walk out with a full leadership operating system, a trusted circle of peers, and a repeatable way to scale without losing yourself along the way. There are only 12 seats in this group, and most are already spoken for. It's an application-only process. Go to arcusgroup.com/mastermind to apply. Okay, let's talk about leadership, and then I want to get into simplicity. How do you think about your leadership? What do you think about your leadership and the influence it is creating for others? Because oftentimes people think of leadership as a role, and they think of it as a count of people for which they are responsible. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but I'd love to get your take on it.
I'm absolutely a leader, and I'm a leader in a different way in this business than I was then. But the visual that hit me, which may be useful for people listening, is like a leadership triangle. This idea that there's a triangle, and there's kind of three sides to leadership in the way that I'm living it out in this current entrepreneurial business. And it starts at the base with self-leadership. And then on one side, I see team leadership. And then on the other side, I actually see thought leadership, which I think is unique to the type of businesses that the business I run and the businesses I serve. And so, self-leadership is something I've learned from you, Dusty, that's the foundation. That's why it's the bottom of the triangle, right? Like, first and foremost, we are leaders of ourselves, our own personal everything, right? Habits, routines, how we show up, how we treat our families, our faith life, all that's a form of leadership, because ultimately you have to be intrinsically motivated and serve yourself, or serve through your own self-improvement. So self-leadership. Team leadership is the one that I would have really thought of as all leadership before, but even what it means to be a team leader has really expanded in the way I'm doing it now. I do have a full-time employee and I do have contractors, and I would just said, I lead them, right? Like I pay them and I direct them, but the definition of team is actually much greater than that. Like, my team is the community I serve. My team is the mastermind that I'm part of. My team includes my family, right? Because my family is a key part of what makes all this work. And so they're part of the team that I need to have a leadership role in and with. And then this idea of thought leadership, I think, may be unique to a lot of people, where they're like, oh, like, that's external leadership, right? The fact that I go do podcast guesting, speak, like you just said, speak at conferences, write books, share my ideas and my experiences with others, that's a form of leadership, and that I'm able to pass on a lot of this wisdom and lessons learned to others so they can benefit from it. And in the business I run, I get to work very directly with thought leaders. Like, that is how they identify. And so I can be a huge multiplier in their impact in the world. And so I really view this leadership triangle as, it's like, it kind of comes alive and it sort of pulses, and there's this ripple effect in all three directions. Like, the better I'm a self-leader, it affects everything. The better I lead my team, it affects all of their livelihoods and the impact they have. And then this thought leadership pulse really has a major ripple effect in the way that my business is structured, because every person that I affect, they may be affecting tens, hundreds, thousands of people down the line.
I love the way you have refined that, and I'm learning from you, even just hearing you further articulate it through some of the distillation and thinking you've done since we were last together. And, John Maxwell, one of my favorite quotes is leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And so it's not role, it's not title, it's the ability to create an influence for others. And I love that you get to do it in a way that has a ripple effect for others. I want to talk about simplicity, and simplicity scales. And I don't know if this is an original quote of mine or if this is something I just read and I've been chewing on, but I've been thinking about this mindset of complexity is insecurity masquerading as confidence. And I see that so often and I've been guilty of it a million times, where I like to overcomplicate things because then I'm the only guy that knows how to understand it. And like somehow I'm smart. Well, no, like maybe it's the older I've gotten or the more perspective I have, the more experience I have, the more I have valued simplicity. And I would love to hear from you as you think about this. What is simplicity and why is it so important for those of us who are leading ourselves, leading businesses, leading others, really around this idea of if we want to create influence, we have to be doing so in a clear and simple manner. What does that mean to you, Dustin?
Simplicity is getting something down to its essence to where it's replicatable and transferable and understandable, because the reality is if your secret sauce is this amalgamation of like really complex things that only you can decipher, and I felt I had this same idea before too, Dusty, that doesn't actually serve much of a purpose because it can only live inside your brain. To get that out and transfer that so other people can run with it, lead with it, and bring it to more people, it has to be simple and boiled down to something that other people can take and replicate. So yeah,
it's so interesting. Like it's almost in many ways though the antithesis of what many people believe. Like complexity doesn't scale, and people, I won't make that a colloquial. People, I'll say me in some cases have said, hey, in order to scale, we have to have complicated things. Like we have to use bigger systems and all this, whereas as opposed to this distillation of what's truly important, this distillation of the most important thing, because, work expands to fit available space. It always does. It's really a question of what is the most important work? What is the value that's being created, and how are we doing that? And everything else that's not adding value is destroying value. Like at the very worst, it's just consuming energy and resources that could be adding value.
Yeah.
And it is almost binary. If it's not adding value, it's destroying it. And I know for me, I had to start thinking about things through that lens in order to guard against my own desire sometimes to overcomplicate and think about, oh, I'm building something that scales. Well, complexity doesn't scale, and it doesn't scale past the human being that's doing that thing. And sometimes that's a little humbling to think about and to embrace. You mentioned that this has been a journey that you've been on. Were there any aha moments or places or times where you went, like light bulbs went off and you went, oh, I get it?
I'm really guilty of trying to solve problems before they exist, right? I anticipate, and that's the engineering thinking. It's like, what could go wrong? And that's a good, healthy thing to think about, is like, where might this path lead? The problem is if you start spending all your time and energy trying to solve the problem that doesn't exist in front of you, you ignore the problem that's actually there. So an example of this would be, let's say, I run a cohort-based model. So people come in, we sell 12 seats, that's a cohort, and we lead them through the experience that we do. And I have many times stalled my own progress by saying, but what about when there's 3? Or what about when there's 6? Or what, and it's like, well, I'll deal with those problems when they come, because I'm not even equipped to know what that's going to be like. Like, let's solve the problem in front of me, which is filling the first one. To play this out, I filled out one cohort and we filled a second. And these were very isolated cohorts. Like they were on Slack, and like they had all the tools were not good, right? But they got the job done because I was solving for the problem of giving a great experience to these 12 humans and not worrying about how scalable this is, right? But that created complexity, because now I've got 5 different Slack groups and people having back channel conversations, and I'm kind of like losing track. So at the appropriate time, I said, you know what? It'd be really cool if all this existed in one platform. And so then I brought everyone to Circle, and then we have an alumni community. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. Because I solved the problem at the time that it was actually a problem, right? I wouldn't have even known what to put on Circle or to choose Circle had I not done the initial kind of complex version. So I simplified it down, and then we get on Circle, and then people are like, hey, I want to, like, my 90 days is up. I want to keep going. It's like, okay, why don't we try this? And then we tried like a beta group of what became the mastermind. And then we were solving problems in the order that they actually appear, which now I realize that that's the right way to approach things, because I could not have ever foreseen the problems before they existed. And I would have never had the tools, solutions, life experience, and people around me to solve the problem in the moment. So patience is not my virtue. My wife would be. I'm not a very patient person. And so because I'm impatient, sometimes I start to project forward and start to add complexity where it doesn't belong. And I think one of the simplest ways to address that, or one of the easiest ways to address that and be more simple, is just focus on the problem in front of you and be conscious of downstream effects, but don't try to get ahead of yourself and solve problems that don't exist yet. And I help people with this every day. And I think you might say I've helped you with this, where we're trying to solve the scale problem before we've got the product market fit or the first product fixed, right? Like, don't worry about that yet. Let's do an order of operations sort of approach to things.
Yeah, I would, I mean, just to, reinforce that, I would say that that's certainly one of your cone of genius elements that you've been able to deploy for me, is like, hey, don't worry about scaling this thing. Cause it was a great epiphany when you actually we had that conversation about 6 months ago, less than that now, 5 months ago. And you helped me understand, I was engineering in my head for a scaled solution before establishing product market fit and value to the customer creation, and had to go, oh, I need to take off this thinking model hat and go, let's solve this problem in front of us and just solve that problem. And there'll be more problems. There's always going to be more problems.
Always new problems.
There's always going to be more problems. So let's engineer for the right solution now. And it's given me a lot to think about through the lens of, almost in many cases, what my old knock on software engineers, when I used to have, technical folks running into me, is, software engineers code. And so like hey, if we've got a problem, we're just going to create more code. And then you just create more code. And they're like, wait a minute, what problem are we actually solving here? Does the customer care? And a lot of times the answer is no, but can you see what this code can do? This is so darn cool.
Yeah, you have a hammer, everything's a nail, right? Yeah,
exactly. And so for me, I know it has been just a tremendous unlock. And I think that's one of the greatest values that working with someone like you and being a member of your community has given to me, is just the ability to see the world through a lens of others who have walked down a path that I haven't walked down and have learned lessons, which is frankly one of the reasons I started this entire podcast in the first place, was that we have all, as leaders, as individuals, as, husbands, fathers, whatever role we're in, we have paid tuition for lessons. Yeah. The greatest joy and value is to give those lessons away for free to others so they can benefit from the tuition that we've already paid. Yeah. And we don't need any recompense for that. Like, I don't need any recompense for that. Like, hey, I did a really dumb thing about 10 years ago. Let me tell you how to avoid that. And if someone gets value out of that, like, that's the reward enough, and that's amazing enough. So I, from the bottom of my heart, am appreciative for you and the other like-minded people that you have surrounded yourself with, because it really does, iron sharpens iron, and it becomes an exponential gathering of impact and effort, not just an additive 1 + 1 + 1. It really does create much further value. I want to shift us just a little bit. I've got some rapid fire questions for you. What is a book that you believe every leader must read? And I use that word leader must read very intentionally, because regardless of what role a person is in, a person of influence on the lives of others is a leader. What is a book you believe every leader must read, and why?
The Gap and the Gain. I'm a big Dan Sullivan fan. He did this compilation with Dr. Benjamin Hardy. It's fine, but I would say the audio book of Gap and the Gain specifically, because the Gap and the Gain is just, the whole premise is very simple. Measure backwards. Like, you can only know you're making progress by looking backwards and not chasing a horizon line that continues to move. And I'd say the audiobook in particular, because it's got a lot of additional golden nuggets from Dan Sullivan's own mouth. And I go back to that one frequently.
I completely agree. It's in my top 5 list of all time. And it is, as a person who for many, many years lived and existed in a gap mindset and was always measuring myself against what I thought I should be, as opposed to turning around and looking backwards and going, wow, look how far I've come.
Yes.
I think it's one of the greatest mindset shifts you can have as a person who is striving and really being able to appreciate the value of what you've striven for. Okay. What's a lesson that you just had to learn the hard way? Like, all the advice in the world, all the wise people on podcasts, or in my case, unwise people on podcasts sharing wisdom. It would have been great, but you just had to learn it the hard way.
Man, I'd say trust but verify. I always encourage people to do that whenever they're like coming over my way and they're like wanting to know more about what we do. I'm like, go talk to these 3 other people. Like I want you to trust me, but ultimately I want you to make a decision that feels amazing for you and that you're all in on. And I feel like that would be one that I definitely told my kids many times, especially the teenage daughters, like, trust the guy, but verify that what he's saying is actually his intention, So yeah.
That's so incredibly wise. A lesson that needed to have it tattooed on the back of my eyelids. Talk to me about routine for a minute. What's a daily routine or practice that you follow almost without fail because it makes you a better human, husband, father, leader, whatever?
I used to be big into the, long morning routines and the miracle morning and all that stuff. My morning routine now is pretty simple, and it starts with scripture. So I like to show up in the morning. First thing I do before I get into electronics, email, all that stuff, even before I exercise, just simple daily readings of scripture and some meditation around that. And I also attend a daily morning prayer call with a small group of guys. And so it just puts the priorities in order, right? And so I start the day trying to tap into God and the infinite, and it really just puts me in the right mindset for the day. And then I close every day. This is actually a gap and a gain exercise from Dan Sullivan. I have a journal by my recliner in the living room, and as my wife and I are getting ready to kind of head out to the bedroom to retire, it takes me about 2 minutes. I have a running list every day: wins today, wins tomorrow. And I just document 3 wins of the day, like actual things that happen. Could be a business win, could be a personal win. And I think the really cool part is then I do wins tomorrow. And these aren't trying to predict the future, but they're things I anticipate going well tomorrow. And those are sort of the last things that enter my mind before I retire for the day. And I think that is a really positive way to do the gain, reflect back on the day that just happened, and put your mind towards what's up next, what's coming tomorrow, being mentally prepared for that.
I love that. This is one of my favorite questions. I've asked it for years and years in interviews, for whether I was interviewing C-suite leaders or frontline, closest to the customer individuals. And I'm always curious to hear what people say. At the end of the day, when you shut it down, what is it that allows you to go, today was a good day? Today was a day where on my scoreboard, it was all 100s. And, you're already capturing these every day, so it's probably pretty easy for you. But what is it systemically that you look at and use to be your measure of success for a day?
The word community is like all that comes to mind. It's, have I built community? I think of every inflection point in my entire life has happened in the context of some community. And that's the central part of my business model now is ultimately bringing people into community. So I know I'm winning if the community is growing and if the people within the community are growing in their own clarity, confidence, and connection to each other. I can point to that and say, I did something, right? And I think that is ultimately going to be, I hope, part of the legacy I leave is helping my kids and my wife feel more in community to our faith existence, to each other, to our family, and then on the business front, like very directly building community that people feel connected to and that drives them forward and making a bigger impact in the world.
I love that. That's awesome. All right, last question before we wrap up. What's a cause or an organization that you are passionate about supporting?
My wife and I are heavily involved in local pregnancy resource center. So she's on the board. I'm involved in other ways. I've even though I don't create websites anymore, I created theirs, and I try to help them with marketing, things like that. The reason for that is, for one, we're pro-life and we believe deeply in that cause, but it really goes back to some of my own roots, without getting into the details. Growing up with some of the circumstances I was in and spending nights in battered women's shelters, and realizing that it would have been a lot easier for my mom just not to have me around, and when she was going through how I came into the world. So just trying to be a resource to other vulnerable people who don't have the benefit at this moment in their life of having support and having a community around them who supports them, like having some sort of local grassroots way to actually touch people and make a difference in their most difficult, uncertain, trying time, and it, it's definitely an extension and expression of my faith walk too. So that's a big one for us.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for doing that and for living out loud your beliefs and those things that have formed you. Dustin, if people are interested in learning more about you and more about your work of community, of enabling and empowering entrepreneurs to broaden their message, to evangelize what they do, how can they learn more and how can they reach out?
Yeah, it's just sevenfigureleap.com. So the number 7, sevenfigureleap.com is our home base. You can, of course, get on emails and we can teach you all about podcast guesting and all those things. But ultimately, if you're in Dusty's universe and you enjoy Leadership Unlocked and the things here, I think, I'd love to have a conversation with you. But yeah, sevenfigureleap.com is the home base for all the things we do, and look forward to definitely connecting with your people. We have the 7-Figure Leap podcast, which you'll also find on the same website, where I am able to interview some amazing people, including Dusty recently. So absolutely tune into the podcast. If you like podcasts, I think you'll find a ton of value in the work that we do there. And 7figureleap.com is the home base for everything.
Yeah, I can personally attest to the value of your podcast. It's given me a lot of richness, and it's just always amazing to learn from other people. Dustin, thank you so much. I appreciate your tremendous gift of your time and the investment you're making into creating community and audiences that are not just your own, but can really go out and create a ripple effect. So I appreciate your leadership, and it really does mean the world. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm grateful for the opportunity, Dusty. Thank you, and look forward to all the things to come.
Amen to that. Awesome. If today's episode gave you something to think about, something to apply, then there's more where that came from. Head over to arcusgroup.com and sign up for our newsletter. It's where we share tools, insights, and our leadership frameworks to help you lead with more clarity, more alignment, and more impact. No fluff, just what helps you lead better. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time on Leadership Unlocked.